Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Ethan Cross was no stranger to the feeling of abandonment. He had lived through war zones, betrayals, and the cold calculations of military hierarchy for most of his life. But nothing compared to being left for dead on Pandora, one of the most unforgiving planets in the universe. The jungle around him pulsed with life, a far cry from the cold steel of the military base he once called home. His leg was torn open, a deep wound that had festered for days now, and every step felt like 1,000 needles stabbing into his skin. The voices of his former comrades echoed in his mind, the orders, the dismissal, and finally, the silence as they flew away without him. Expendable, they had called him, a useful pawn in a game much larger than he ever realized. And now, bleeding out, barely able to stand, he knew they had won. The jungle would swallow him whole, his body disappearing among the vines, nothing left to mark his grave. He stumbled, his vision blurring as the heat and humidity overwhelmed him. His foot caught on something, and he fell hard onto the ground. He tried to push himself up, but his body wouldn't respond. Instead, he lay there, eyes closed, waiting for the end. But Pandora wasn't done with him yet. Ethan wasn't sure how long he lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, but at some point, he felt hands and something softer lifting him. He opened his eyes and saw nothing but the bioluminescent glow of the forest. It was as if the jungle itself was alive, breathing, pulsating with energy. He wasn't alone. He felt something, or someone, watching over him, guiding him toward some unknown fate. Then, darkness. When he woke again, he wasn't the same man. In fact, he wasn't a man at all. Ethan's eyes flickered open, and immediately, something felt a broken bar off. His body was different, larger, more powerful. His muscles didn't ache like before, his vision sharper, and the air tasted a broken bar purer. Slowly, he lifted his hands, and a wave of confusion and panic hit him. These weren't his hands. They were larger, covered in a smooth, blue hue. Navy hands. His breath caught in his throat, and he sat up, examining his new body. His legs were healed, his senses heightened. He wasn't human anymore. He had been reborn as a Navy. For a brief moment, there was only confusion, but then the memories flooded back. The human military had left him to die, but it seemed they couldn't quite let him go. Some part of him had been saved, experimented on, and transferred into this Navy body as part of the Avatar project. It was supposed to be a mission and infiltration. But something had gone wrong. This wasn't just a disguise or a puppet controlled by his human mind. He felt alive in this body, more connected to Pandora than he had ever imagined. And with that connection came an overwhelming sense of anger, betrayal. He had been abandoned once before, and now he had the chance to return, and not as a man, but as something far more dangerous. As Ethan adjusted to his new form, he found himself among a Navy clan, learning their ways and customs. At first, he was wary, unsure of how much of his humanity remained and how much was consumed by the Navy spirit. But there was one who helped him bridge the gap between the two worlds. Salia, a Navy warrior who had grown curious about him. She had seen the pain in his eyes, the flicker of something that made him different from her people, and she had chosen to teach him. Salia, Ethan called to her one evening as they sat by a fire, the jungle humming around them. "Why'd you help me?" She turned to him, her eyes glowing in the low light. "Because you are not like the others. The sky people, they come to take you. A broken bar, you are torn." Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the strength of his Navy body surge with frustration. "They abandoned me, left me to die." "I should have died, yet you live," she said simply. "Pandora chose you." He looked into her eyes, trying to understand. The Navy believed in Iwa, the spiritual force that connected all life on the planet. But Ethan wasn't Navy, not really. He was human, or at least he had been. Now, he was something in between, and the anger that burned inside him was a very human emotion. "You speak of Iwa like she has a plan," Ethan said, his voice hard. But what about revenge? What about justice? Sally looked away, her expression unreadable. Revenge will not bring peace. You must choose your path carefully, or you will lose yourself to the darkness. Ethan didn't respond. He had already lost too much. What was one more piece of his soul in exchange for retribution? As days turned into weeks, Ethan honed his skills. Sally taught him the ways of the Navia, how to move silently through the jungle, how to fight with their weapons, and how to listen to the whispers of the planet itself. But even as he learned, his mind was consumed by thoughts of revenge. He had heard rumors of a new human convoy moving through the jungle, led by Colonel Stark, the man who had ordered his abandonment. It was the chance Ethan had been waiting for. The night before the attack, Sally approached him. "You are not ready for this," she said, her voice filled with concern. Ethan shook his head. "I have to do this. They need to pay." Sally stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "And what will you become after you destroy them? You think this will make you whole again, but it will only shatter what remains." Ethan clenched his jaw, refusing to listen. He couldn't stop now. He had come too far. "Stay out of my way," he said coldly, turning away from her. That night, Ethan led a small group of Navy warriors on a covert mission to intercept the human convoy. They moved like shadows through the dense jungle, their footsteps silent, their weapons sharp. The convoy was unaware of the danger closing in on them. As they approached the convoy, Ethan's heart pounded with anticipation. His hands gripped the Navy bow tightly, and his eyes locked onto the figure of Colonel Stark, standing near one of the vehicles, barking orders at his men. The sight of the man who had condemned him to die ignited a fire in Ethan's chest, and for a moment, he saw nothing but the opportunity for vengeance. The attack was swift and brutal. Ethan's knowledge of human tactics gave the Navy the advantage, and they quickly overwhelmed the convoy's defenses. Explosions lit up the night sky, and the jungle echoed with the sounds of battle. Ethan moved with precision, taking down soldiers one by one, his mind focused solely on reaching Stark. Finally, he stood face to face with the colonel. "Cross?" Stark's voice was filled with disbelief. "You a broken bar? I thought you were dead." Ethan's eyes narrowed, his Navy body towering over the man who had once held his life in his hands. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Stark sneered, his face twisted in arrogance. "You were just another expendable asset, Cross. You knew the risks." Ethan raised his weapon, his hands trembling with rage. "And now you'll pay for it." Before Stark could react, Ethan released the arrow, and it struck the colonel in the chest. Stark's eyes widened in shock, and he fell to the ground, blood pooling around him. But even as Ethan watched the life drain from his former commander, there was no sense of satisfaction, no relief. Instead, there was a hollow emptiness. As the battle raged on around him, Ethan stood frozen, staring down at Stark's lifeless body. He had gotten his revenge, but the price felt far steeper than he had anticipated. Suddenly, the ground beneath him seemed to tremble, and the jungle around him shifted, as if Pandora itself was reacting to his actions. He felt a strange energy coursing through his body, something far more powerful and dangerous than he had ever experienced before. It was as if Pandora was feeding on his anger, his hatred, amplifying it. For the first time since his transformation, Ethan felt fear. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as the ground continued to rumble beneath him, the jungle around him alive with a fury he didn't understand. His mind swirled with confusion and dread, and it wasn't just the aftermath of the battle or the weight of the revenge he had sought. It was something deeper, something ancient that had awoken within him. Pandora reacted to his actions. It was no longer just the lush, mysterious world he had once known. It was as if the planet itself had a will, a consciousness, and it had been waiting for a moment like this. His vengeance, his hatred, they were fueling something far darker, something he wasn't prepared to face. As he stood frozen, the Navy warriors around him regrouped, their voices low with concern. Sally approached, her gaze sharp and wary. She didn't speak immediately, But Ethan could see the disappointment in her eyes. She had warned him, tried to steer him away from this path, but he hadn't listened. "Ethan," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant cries of battle. "Pandora is responding to you. You need to stop before it's too late." He shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. His body felt heavy, like the energy of the planet itself was seeping into his veins. "I don't understand. What's happening?" "You've taken life out of hatred, out of vengeance. Pandora's energy flows through all living things, and when you disrupt that balance, it pushes back. It's not just about HFY's will. The planet has power of its own, and it's feeding off what you've done." Ethan clenched his fists, the tension coiling inside him like a spring ready to snap. He didn't want to believe her. This was just a planet, a resource-rich world the humans had come to exploit. But everything he'd experienced since waking up in this Navi body said otherwise. The visions, the dreams, they weren't just figments of his imagination. Pandora was alive in a way he had never thought possible. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't ask for any of it." Thalia stepped closer, her expression softening. "No one asks for war. But you chose vengeance. And now you must face the consequences." Ethan stared down at the lifeless body of Colonel Stark, the man who had set all of this in motion. His hatred for Stark had driven him here, driven him to betray the human race and embrace the Navi ways. But in doing so, he had unleashed something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. He had become the very thing he had once sworn to fight. He could feel Pandora's pull growing stronger, a deep, primal force tugging at his core, urging him to unleash more violence, more destruction. The rage inside him had been fed, but it wasn't satisfied. It wanted more. The planet's energy was entwining with his own, creating a dangerous symbiosis that was spiraling out of control. "I can't stop it," Ethan muttered, feeling the weight of it pressing down on him. Thalia reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him for just a moment. "You can, you must, you have to let go of your anger, Ethan. If you don't, Pandora will consume you." He wanted to believe her, but the power was intoxicating. It flowed through him like fire, urging him to continue the fight, to wipe out every human who had wronged him. But deep down, he knew Thalia was right. He was on the edge of something terrible, something irreversible. But how could he let go? After everything that had been taken from him, his life, his humanity, his purpose, how could he just forgive and move on? His thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of engines, human reinforcements. He looked up to see the sky filling with military craft, more of the human army descending to Pandora. They were coming to finish the job, to destroy the Navi once and for all, and they would kill him too if they realized what he had become. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, his final chance to choose a revenge or redemption. He could feel Pandora urging him to strike, to wipe out the human invaders and protect the planet. But that wasn't what Thalia was asking of him. She was asking him to let go, to find another way, to protect without destroying. He looked into her eyes, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Thalia squeezed his arm gently. "We fight to protect, not to destroy. You have the power to stop this, but you have to make the choice." The engines grew louder, and Ethan's pulse quickened. He could feel the pull of Pandora's energy urging him toward violence, but he fought against it, resisting the urge to let his anger consume him. With a deep breath, he stepped away from Thalia and turned to face the incoming forces. The Navi around him were ready for battle, but Ethan knew that more bloodshed would only feed the darkness inside him, the darkness that Pandora seemed so eager to cultivate. He closed his eyes and focused on the connection he felt to the planet, to the life force that ran through every tree, every animal, every Navi. It was a web of energy, delicate yet powerful, and he was part of it now, whether he liked it or not. He couldn't destroy it. He had to protect it. As the first wave of human forces descended, Ethan raised his hands, not in violence, but in surrender. He opened himself to the energy of Pandora, letting it flow through him, not as a weapon, but as a shield. The ground trembled again, but this time, it wasn't out of anger. It was as if the planet was responding to his decision, to his choice to protect rather than destroy. The human soldiers, confused by the lack of resistance, hesitated. The Na'vi, following Ethan's lead, didn't attack. Instead, they stood their ground, watching as the humans approached. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty on both sides. But then, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath the human soldiers shifted, and massive roots began to rise from the earth, not to crush them, but to create a barrier between the humans and the Na'vi. The soldiers stumbled back, fear in their eyes as the jungle itself seemed to come alive, forming a protective wall around the Na'vi warriors. Ethan could feel the power of Pandora coursing through him, but it wasn't driven by anger or hatred anymore. It was a force of nature, a defense mechanism to protect the planet and its people. The humans hesitated, their weapons trained on the Na'vi, but they didn't fire. They were unsure, unprepared for this kind of resistance. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Leave," he said. "There's nothing for you here. Go back to your ships. This planet is not yours to take." For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the human commander, clearly confused by the turn of events, gave the order to withdraw. One by one, the soldiers backed away, retreating to their transports. The engines roared to life, and within minutes, they were gone, leaving the Na'vi and Pandora untouched. As the last of the ships disappeared into the sky, Ethan collapsed to his knees, the weight of what he had just done hitting him all at once. He had stopped the violence, chosen a path of protection rather than destruction. But it had come at a cost. Sally knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You chose the right path." Ethan nodded, but the emptiness inside him remained. He had spared the humans, but his quest for revenge had left a scar on his soul that would never fully heal. He had become something different now, not entirely human, not fully Na'vi. He was a man caught between two worlds, neither of which he truly belonged to. As he gazed out at the jungle, the glow of Pandora's bioluminescent plants flickering in the distance, Ethan knew that his journey wasn't over. He had made his choice, but the path ahead was still uncertain. The planet had spared him, given him a second chance. But what he did with the chance would determine the fate of both the Na'vi and the humans who sought to control Pandora's power. For now, he would protect this world, even if it meant sacrificing the last remnants of his humanity. And as the night deepened and the jungle hummed with life, Ethan felt, for the first time in a long while, a sense of peace. He had let go of his anger, of his need for revenge. But in doing so, he had become something greater, something that Pandora itself had embraced. The soul of vengeance had been replaced by the spirit of a protector,